lemons from New York. How they came here, we don't know. They just came here. You want us to ask the lemons how they came? How did you come here? He says by truck.
Since the beginning of civilization, people have used the environment to grow crops. Creating food is the major activity of agriculture. Waiters, grocery clerks, and bakers. Like farmers, they depend on agriculture for their jobs, as we all do for our food. In this program, we will look at the sustainability of how we grow crops in soil, here in North America. In the 1830s, John Deere invented the steel plow. It was the start of mechanization. And for those who could afford to purchase the plow, farming became easier and put a vast amount of land in cultivation. After the Second World War, chemicals were introduced as a means of fertilizing the soil and controlling harmful pests. Sustainable development. The widespread use of this term began with the United Nations report, Our Common Future. Sustainable development is a decision-making process that considers our need to keep our planet alive, stay healthy, and make sure there are the goods we need and enough jobs, now and in the future. Sustainable development can be symbolized by a triangle within a circle. The circle represents the natural cycles of our world and the harmony of the native medicine wheel. Three components make up the triangle: economic, which means how each possible choice affects businesses, jobs, and money; environmental, which means how the world around us could be affected; and the third part, health of society, which is how each option would affect the quality of our lives. Sustainable action creates a balance between the three parts, making sure that no part destroys another, and life on Earth continues indefinitely into the future. Central America was home to the old empire of the Mayas. Anthropologists tell us the Mayas abandoned their cities every 50 years or so. After their fields were worn out, with the nutrients in the soil used up, the Mayan farmers moved to other clearings. Eventually, the available land supply simply became exhausted. The Mayas were forced to leave their cities and move on to new, fertile soil. The Mayas practiced a kind of farming that was ultimately unsustainable.
My name is René Lafont. This is my father, Olivier. We've been farming here since, I started in 1982. I took over the family farm, and my dad started farming around 1940.
1940, yeah.
And his father came in 1909 to Manitoba.
My name is Clark Phillips. My partner, Susan Tyler, and I farm this farm in southern New Brunswick near Sussex. It's a mixed farming operation. It's certified organic.
Both Renee and Clark produce crops, although their methods are different. What are the major issues of sustainable development that we have to think about in agriculture? First of all, we have to think about producing crops over a long period of time. We also have to think about the effects that agricultural activities have on the environment, both on and off the farm.
Well, without soil, we'd all be dead. Well, the relationship between the soil and food quality is quite close. It's more so in certain crops, like leafy crops, for example. There's quite a dramatic difference between things grown in soils of different fertility. Spinach leaves, for example, are very sensitive to differences. And you can have a difference of over 100 times, for example, in the amount of manganese in that spinach leaf, or 50 times in the amount of iron.
Soil is a mix of minerals, air pockets, water, and organic matter that lies on the surface of the earth. It is filled with living things.
You know, when you look on the landscape, you see perhaps a forest or a field full of cattle. And the thing to remember is that however much you see above the surface of the soil, there's always more life beneath the surface of the soil. There's three different worlds in the soil, because the soil is made up of little particles which sort of touch one another, and in between them there's spaces. And some of that space has got water in it, particularly the water that's surrounding the particles. And so for an organism living in the soil, they've really got three choices of how to live there. One is to live in the water film around the particles, and they're just like things that would live in the river, but on a very small version of that, and little little worms and little one-celled animals and so forth. And then there are things that wander around in the air spaces, and they would include mites and springtails and little insects and all sorts of other little miniature things. And they're limited by the size of the environment. And then there are things that can create their own space, like earthworms that can burrow and push their way through the soil. Well, the soil generally has been getting worse since the agricultural revolution, largely because the process of breaking up the ground exposes it. We've eventually evolved a very exposing sort of agriculture.
To prosper, we need productive soil now and in the future. Yet farming can make soil less fertile and more susceptible to erosion. Cultivating the soil, by turning it over and over, leaves it exposed to sun, wind, and water. If the crops are harvested or taken off the fields without organic matter being returned to the fields, the soil is further degraded. These factors lead to the loss of valuable topsoil. Topsoil that can get blown around in dust storms or settle as silt in rivers. Working together, farmers and government have implemented programs to control erosion.
Morning. Glad to come here today. We're going to have a planting of 200 Manitoba maple trees. One of the tools that we have to combat soil erosion is a shelter belt. And a shelter belt not only reduces wind velocities and speeds, and if you notice that you're on a very light sandy type soil, this is where they come into, sorry about that, they come into use. A shelter belt tree or row will protect on the downwind side approximately 15 times its height.
An even more effective way of protecting the topsoil is keeping the ground covered with a layer of vegetation. René Lafond uses a method called zero-till. He leaves stubble on his fields in order to stop erosion.
I started doing some direct seeding into the stubble. By leaving the stubble up in the fall, it traps the snow, so you don't get the wind erosion and the water erosion.
What is organic farming?
It's a way of farming that looks at the soil and says, I'm going to build up the soil. We build up the organic matter. We only till those strips of ground that we're ready to plant, and we leave these strips of triple mix here, there, here, there. When you increase the amount of organic matter in the soil, it tends to make the structure of the soil such that it holds together better. It's not as easily affected by the water. I mean, if you take plain sand, for instance, all right, and pour water on it, it'll run off and make a hole. But if you take some of this soil here and pour water on it, it'll tend to stay together. And it's because of the increase in organic matter. The water was running between these two rows. It ran through here, exposed these rocks, carried off this fine silt, but then we got it. We stopped it right here. It got into this clover, and it dropped any silt that it was carrying. It dropped it right there. And if we look over here on the other side of the clover, no water came out here. So it worked.
If agriculture is to be sustainable, it is necessary that the topsoil be cared for and not allowed to erode. The loss of topsoil not only affects the environment, but threatens the productivity of the farm.